it speaks to, what we have talked about with making your choices about how you engage in the food system with intention. Every time you make a choice about what you cook for your meals, where you purchase your food, that is a choice that you make on how you support the agricultural system in your community.
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of global food systems. It's produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University. I'm Maureen Olevnik, Coordinator of Global Food Systems. I'd like to welcome back our host, Dr. Jim Stack, Professor of Plant Pathology and Director of the Great Plains Diagnostic Network here at Kansas State University, and Dr. Colleen Lynn, Associate Professor of Communication Studies and Director of the Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy here at K-State. Is our food system sustainable? The consumption of seasonal, locally produced food sustains nutrition value, reduces the carbon footprint, and supports the growth of the local economies. In many ways, we have lost our connection to food, including understanding where our food comes from, how it is produced, the camaraderie developed in sharing food, and why it is important to eat seasonally and with intention. In this podcast, we talk with Nat and Alison Bjerke-Harvey, co-owners of Piccalilli Farm in Geary County outside of Manhattan, Kansas. With formal training in history and environmental biology, Nat and Alison's interest and passion for food has taken them beyond those areas of study, headlong into the food system. From baking to cheese making, they have now landed squarely in the arena of sustainable farming and community building. Is it time to rethink what a sustainable food system is? I'd like to welcome today our guests, Nat Bjerke-Harvey and Alison Bjerke-Harvey with Piccalilli Farm. What we'd like to start off with is for you to please give us a little background about yourself, and then hopefully we'll get into some good discussion on what Piccalilli Farm is about.
Well, Piccalilli Farm started in 2013 when Nat and I moved here from central Illinois. We moved back to Manhattan as this is where I grew up, and we came to be close to family and to circle back to that and have the support of family that still lived here. And we found some farmland just south of I-70 on Lower McDowell Road and purchased the farm in May of 2013 and then moved in September of 2013. We started at that time with the intention of becoming a farmstead goat dairy where we would milk dairy goats and make cheese, as that had been our vocation just prior to moving here. We had worked at a farmstead goat dairy in central Illinois and had been really inspired by that experience and really enjoyed it. When we arrived, we put everything that we had into purchasing the property, so the infrastructure for the farmstead dairy kind of went by the wayside as we got our footing in town. I worked off farm. We both worked off farm for the first several years. I working as a baking instructor at the American Institute of Baking, and Nat working at various restaurants and at a cut-to-order cheese counter in town. We started off, because we didn't have the infrastructure for doing the dairy, initially just working to kind of establish our presence as a farm by planting a vegetable garden and getting started at the farmer's market. In addition to, wanting to have the cheese-making enterprise, our primary, I think, motivation for starting the farm and really taking this path was to facilitate a stronger local food system. And, we had worked in cheese for a long time, but Nat and I both came from a background of working in the food industry for a long time in various aspects. So, being able to do something that was low input or low investment initially, like gardening vegetables, was a way that we could at least put ourselves out there, get started in the local economy, and start building a conversation and momentum, we hoped, towards eating seasonally and building a sustainable local food system here in town.
Oh, that was pretty good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I can round out a few things there. I would add the caveat that, we, when shopping for farmland, were predominantly looking for a model that was similar to the farm from which we came from, which was a farmstead goat dairy located very close to a college town. They were right outside of Champaign-Urbana. And when their farm exceeded the what they saw as the market demand for Champaign-Urbana, they were within a 2-hour drive to Chicago. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking for sort of a similar geographical orientation for our farm, where we would be able to rely on, a large college that was going to have I would say an informed consumer populace, but be within a couple hours of larger markets if we needed it. And the other caveat that I would add to that is we didn't want to be on the coast. We both wanted to set up our farm business in a part of the country where we were going to be educators. We were going to be growing different kinds of vegetables, doing goat cheese, doing a style of agriculture that was probably not very common in the farmers market community and in the food system. And we, there is a noble ambition in that goal, but there's also a part of that is really hard. But we were ready. I mean, with between us, 5 to 8 years of cheese retail, and we've both worked in farmers markets for a long time and done, face-to-face customer interactions. We both are good at that, and we're ready for that challenge of what it would take to be, selling Japanese turnips and microgreens and right. Heritage breed poultry, and the education component piece of that would be entailed. So we were sort of looking around the Midwest, shopping half-heartedly, but when Allison's mother found out that there was a chance that maybe we would settle on farmland that was outside of Manhattan, that would sort of fit that, they were pretty quick to find land that fit what we were looking for. And, when I say fit what we're looking for, I mean the initial intention was we were milking 75 to 100 goats. We were looking for 40 acres or so of pasture. We wanted at least 10 acres of something arable. And price per acre was a huge deal for us. I mean, Allison sort of nicely said it. I can say it. We were cheesemakers. We were cooks. We there was not a lot of capital on hand. So price per acre was a big piece of that. And, we were able to finance the operation with the purchase with help from our parents, our own money, and with the help of the Farm Service Agency. I mean, federal beginning farmer grant, mortgage assistance. So that all really played into us choosing this as the place to be. And, Allison's right, the farm, because we're first-generation farmers, we're buying this outright, we're building this, we're reinvesting all money that we're making into the business, and this is organically built from the ground up. The farm enterprises started at, low overhead, so a half acre of vegetables is where we started. The first batch of birds we did for meat production was 50, and we started with 35 layers. And, those things have just grown. As we could build bigger houses for the chickens, we bought more birds. As we could afford the equipment to, and we're talking about farming predominantly by hand, but there is some mechanization of it. But as we could afford better mechanization, we moved from half acre to now farming, about 1 3/4 acres. Very intensive vegetable production. And then the other sort of piece, I don't think that we've given up on what a farmstead dairy would be and how that fits into our farm. But what has happened is these enterprises that we started have become ends unto themselves. And as we've diversified into different versions of that, be it, turkeys or be it microgreen production, those things have all, we're not living high on the hog, but, we are making a living. And, the intention was always that those enterprises would, as sort of Alison said, we were getting a foothold in the marketplace, trying to build a part of the farmers market, the economy of the farmers market. What we saw there was not a lot of vendors that were making a living selling vegetables that they grew. There's lots of farmers at the farmers market, and a lot of them, in the off seasons will be selling vegetables that they didn't grow. And we really wanted it to be a food community where the community could shop from us and purchase the food that was going to sustain them year round, and it was grown locally. And then that means that we're switching the way we're talking about eating seasonally, because there's just a time of the year where there are no tomatoes, and there's a time of the year where you're going to eat a lot of salad, and all that kind of stuff. So that was all. That part of the education was all something that we were game for and wanted to really drive home. And I guess I think that's
there are so many things
intro.
that's a good background in there.
So many things I would like to follow up on, and we will later on. I've got on my notes that I'm curious about your relationship with your customers, and I wondered if you didn't think about it as an educator relationship. So we can talk more about that later. I'm really interested in. You talked about the local food system and that being that part of your motivation in the first place, and I find that interesting that you had that in mind from the word go. But before we move on to some of those things, let's hear more about the farm, Piccalilli Farm.
Oh, sure.
So what's in that name?
Yeah, so Piccalilli is a variety relish, English in origin. And it's a variety relish that's made with whatever is in season at the time. The southern equivalent in the United States is chow chow. So it is a name that reflects our commitment to eating seasonally. And I do like to champion things like eating seasonally and say things like, well, Alison and I wanted to be homesteaders, and then we wanted to figure out how to have a business that could also be a homesteader. And after 10 years of this, I don't think it's quite that simple, but it is true that for us in the way that we live, we want to be able to limit the carbon footprint of the food that we consume. And we think that eating seasonally allows you to eat the most delicious food. And we hope that we're able to elevate that style of eating, or elevate is not the right word, make it accessible to a community around us. Right. So Piccalilli is a reflection of sort of the seasonal eating commitment piece of our business. So the farm itself is 60 acres. There are about 35 acres of, tall grass, prairie, pasture land on the property, which is a nice way of saying that there's very little topsoil. So it's not arable. There's about 15 acres of cultivatable river bottom soil. And then the remainder piece is woodlot, basically.
And considering that you're making a living off of, what did you say, 1.5 acres that you're cultivating intensively, there's some more opportunity there.
Well, yeah. I mean, if we were looking to expand vegetable production, I mean, most small market style farming models that that sort of fall into the bandwidth of what we're doing, they tap out somewhere around 4 or 5 acres. I mean, once you get beyond that, you're just talking about a different version of vegetable farming.
Could you talk a little bit about your version of vegetable farming? I mean, you made reference to some mechanization, but are there particular kind of practices that you follow?
Right. So at a small scale, that means that we're farming with a 2-wheeled tractor is the mechanization that we're using. So it looks like a pretty fancy tiller, but it's more than that. But it is a walk-behind tractor that has a PTO on it, so you can use different implements so that we can. We could shape beds, we can till, or we can harrow. We can treat the soil as you would with a tractor, but we can do it on a really small scale. So we farm on a 30-inch permanent bed system with an 18-inch walkway. So it would be inaccessible at a tractor size to farm in that space. And the other really integral piece of thinking about farming at that scale, which is very different than commodity agriculture, is we're triple, quadruple farming a bed in a year. So, for instance, right now we're beginning of May. And so we've had beds that overwintered as spinach. They went out of spinach in March, became lettuce mix. They were lettuce mix from March until this week. and then this week they are tomatoes, and then they will stay in the long renting tomato crop till about October, at which point they will go back to another cold crop. So, and part of this is based on a soil viability piece of it, where, keep vegetation in your ground at all time is the best way to preserve the soil biome in there. And that's an integral piece of it. The flip side of that coin is that we need the soil to be making money. Right. So, we don't have, and it's soil erosion, we are 1 3/4 acres of soil that we cultivate is, it started out as a dense clay loam. We didn't choose the best river bottom soil on our property. We chose based on availability of irrigation, in the sense that we do irrigate with rural water, and we needed it to be accessible. At this point, part of our vegetable operation is irrigated by McDowell Creek, which runs adjacent to a portion of our property as well. But we started with a dense clay loam. We've amended that soil, through sort of keeping it with constant crop in it, as well as through a mind-boggling amount of compost addition, added by hand by wheelbarrow and then incorporated into the soil.
You mentioned that you have quite a bit of experience in different jobs in the food system, but I didn't hear vegetable production.
Oh, sure.
So I wonder how much experimentation was needed to find that right mix to get things that would grow throughout the year. How did you figure that out?
I came with no vegetable production experience, but Nat had some prior.
Yeah, I mean, I majored in history and focused on Russian literature and Latin American politics. And
so the obvious connection.
Clearly.
To agriculture, yeah, sure. And when I graduated, I graduated from the University of Michigan. I at that point was, my advisor sort of said, well, you should have gone to Michigan State because that's the sort of agricultural school. And I said, no, I didn't end up there. So, but for me, my mother's sister ran for a lot of years a nonprofit of producer-only farmers markets in the Washington, D.C. area. And I grew up volunteering and spending my weekends at those markets. And I began working in the restaurant industry late in high school. I worked in it all through college. By the end of the time in college, I was working in a fine dining sort of situation where I saw restaurants with direct relationships with local farmers featuring seasonal food on their menu, and I just thought that was neat. I thought it was really neat. And so I spent a couple years after finishing my undergraduate degree, which I thought was just stopgap years before I was going to become a history teacher, working on small vegetable farms around the country, which, I think farmer is no different than mechanic or doctor or any skilled trade where, you don't just pick it up. A lot of people, I think, sometimes have that misconception about it, but those experiences that I had working on different farms have been integral to the things that we do well.
Yeah.
And then I would also that sounds really great, but we also failed a whole bunch along the way.
There was an enormous amount of trial and error, even with the background.
The off-farm income sustained us as we, screwed things up along the way for a while. I mean, there's no silver lining to that.
I thought you were going to go for the fork or something.
No. So.
What about pest management?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, pest management for us. So we manage. We are not certified organic, but we farm by organic standards, and a lot of those failures in the first years were thinking that we wanted to grow a set of crops and varieties of crops that just don't grow here. They just can't be grown, or they can't be grown.
Growing them organically here
is really challenging.
For example,
watermelons.
Yeah. Okay.
Pumpkins. Organically, these things are really hard.
Because of pests specifically.
Those two in particular, and I picked two cucurbits, right? So the way that we farm cucurbits at this point is we only grow cucumbers inside of a tunnel, and that tunnel has insect barrier cloth around the outside. So we have a non-permeable barrier, and then we grow squash in line with the squash bug life cycle. So, we try very hard to have, and this is frost dependent, but to have our first planting of summer squash in last week. So that hypothetically, by the time the soil temperature reaches whatever threshold where the squash bugs emerge, those plants are big enough that we're going to be able to harvest for, 4 to 6 weeks is for us, organic squash production. That's pretty good. And then the other thing you can do, and this is a piece that it really speaks to our collaboration with K-State, is we have a great relationship with the extension entomologist. His name is Raymond Cloyd. And I sometimes think when he comes to our farm that he's just fascinated because he gets to come and see such a diverse array of cropping system happening and such a wide array of bugs that, for the other vegetable operations that he sees, we're sort of a very interesting challenge on how you manage those. But we delay all other cucurbit planting until the end of July. So if the squash bug emerges in the beginning of May and you don't provide a host plant for it so it doesn't have a chance to do 3 generations back to back to back really fast, their population can be more limited by late July. So we can do a second planting of zucchinis then. And, if it was appropriate to knock on wood, I would. But, then we generally that cropping as well allows us about 4 to 6 weeks worth of harvest. But yeah, we failed it. Well, I always am like, this will be the year for melons. And we even tried some melons. It's never the year for melons. And so, between that and, striped and spotted cucumber beetle, those are just huge challenges for us. But the major things that we've done for pest management are selected varieties that we know are less attractive. So that means, in the world of beans, for instance, a lot of green beans are really problematic around here because they attract a lot of the same pests that soybean production attracts. So we've picked more, just sort of trial and error found bean varieties that are just less attractive to some of those pests. That's another good example in there.
Cucumber beetle traps.
Yeah, we've done some. And we grow organically, but we use organically approved pesticides in a very limited capacity. There's a big part of, and I love answering this question at the farmers market, like, oh, well, you don't spray, right? And it's like, well, no, I try not to, but we farm organically, so I abide by organic standards, which means that I use organically approved pesticides in a very limited role in my production. And frankly, if I didn't, I wouldn't be here at the farmers market because we would have lost so many vegetables to pest pressure that I wouldn't be in business.
So I'm interested in the marketing side.
Sure.
How do you decide what to grow? Do you first reach out to your target clientele group, or do you?
Well, a lot of that was, we started just with the things that we like to eat and like to grow, and made sure that we had a diversity of things available. Because we had a fair amount of experience working at farmers markets, we have a good idea of what sort of things are available and what people like to have. That's how we bought a lot of our food when we weren't growing all our vegetables ourselves. So that gave us a good idea of where to start. And then there was a lot of interactions with our customers at the market. So, we made a selection, saw what we could do, brought it, and we have conversations with almost every person that buys our products at the farmers market, and it gives us a chance to have a relationship developed about what people like to have, what people don't like to have so much, and that's that in conjunction with what we've been able to do successfully has helped us kind of hone in on what we grow.
Yeah, I think Allison's right there, that it's a combination of what we are able to produce that fits into our whatever the harvest system, the systems that we have in place, what does well in our soil, and then that just cuts against what sells. Because often I can tell you, we can grow a daikon radish beautifully, but there is only so many daikons you can sell in the Manhattan community. And we send at this point in our farm, and this has the pandemic represented a very big shifting point in our farm, where we went from just dollars amount and engagement in the community at a fairly small amount to we tripled in size in 2020.
Holy cow!
And that just was by meeting a larger demographic in Manhattan. We switched entirely to home delivery when the pandemic set in. We were sort of uncomfortable being at the farmers markets. I was following farmers markets on the East Coast that I had worked at that were all shutting down. The Manhattan Farmers Market, made the choice to stay open, and while I think the farmers markets are like grocery stores and they're an integral part of the food community, I also think in that particular pandemic moment, we all needed to think about how we were engaging in those formats, how we shopped in a grocery store, whether it was wearing masks, washing our hands, all these things. And as I saw other farmers markets around the country not putting in, well, some of them were fairly stringent. Some of them set up, open table kind of systems where you had to make a reservation to go to the market.
Right.
And people could only move to the market in one direction. And there was no more touching of any more produce. And there were hand washing stations. And there were all these regulations that, I guess I'm not so sure how political I want my statements to be here. But for us at the time, those all seemed like sensible regulations. And there was a lot of resistance from the farmers market in Manhattan for sort of any change in practice between vendors and the community. So we chose to switch to home delivery, and we had a lot of customers as well, particularly in older demographics that wanted us to switch to home delivery.
The other piece of switching entirely to home delivery for a period of time there was that when we did that just in the first couple of weeks and our business grew so intensely, like we just physically couldn't do both.
Right. Yeah. That's absolutely true.
We had this huge demand, and these people that had started relying on this service and needed it. We didn't want to rip that service away because we just didn't have the storage space or the manpower or the hours in the day to do both things.
It sounds like the mother of invention is necessity, and you found a need and you were able to meet it because of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and the other piece of that putting the timeline in a very particular structure there is the farmers market was still indoors when everything shut down around St. Patrick's Day. It was at the they do a bi-weekly
at Potroff Hall.
They were doing it at Potroff Hall, but so Potroff Hall is run by Riley County. Riley County said, you can't use the space anymore. And so our immediate response, just because we had product that was ready to sell, and we have a group of farms that are friends of ours that work pretty closely that don't have as active social media presence as we do, don't have a website like we do. We knew that our website had e-commerce capabilities, particularly if we, put some more money into it. Mm-hmm. So we said, well, it's just going to be a few weeks till the market goes back outdoors, because the market goes back outside end of April. And, by then the pandemic, of course, would be over. And so we'll just do home delivery for a few weeks. And we were also at that point, we just let all of our farmer friends put their things on our website without us being like, well, we should probably price them correctly so that we're making some money at the moment. We just sort of,
I remember.
Everybody was just doing.
Wow.
So, we went from, at a farmer's market in the winter, we'll typically have 50 to 65 sales. And then in the first couple weeks of home delivery, we had, 250 people placing orders on our website. Our website was crashing when we opened it on Tuesday mornings. And so, the longer term way that wave has crashed has been that we've retained quite a few more customers and allowed our business to grow.
And are most of those still home delivery, or are those folks who are coming to the farmers market now?
Most have come back to the farmers market. Yeah. It was a weird shift over the last year and a half or so. But it's evened out to, we do still have a core group of people that had become customers during that time that are weekly website customers, order every week on the website, and still get a lot of their food that way, because our website continues to offer more of like an online farmers market. And so, we offer things from other producer-only farms in the region, in our local area, so people can access things from other farms there. Now, at the farmers market, we only sell what we produce, what we grow and produce at our market stands.
You also do some subscription sales, is that right?
We do have a CSA.
Yeah, we have a CSA, and that has sort of ebbed and flowed in size for us. This year we're managing a CSA subscription of 20 members, and it's for 9 weeks in the spring, just started last week, and then it starts again in late summer. As a result of sort of the home delivery program ebbing. I mean, I like to say that of the people that used Farm to Porch, a quarter of them went back to the farmer's market. A quarter of them stayed weekly shoppers on Farm to Porch. A quarter of them went back to being fair weather, either market or website users, but most likely they just become, irregular, once a month, maybe twice a month market shoppers, and a quarter just went away.
Yeah.
And I know that you also do a fair number of sales directly to restaurants, because I see you on the menu.
Yeah, sure.
And I see you delivering.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Because it sounds like from the beginning this was a goal of yours.
Right, yeah.
How did you start those relationships?
I spent a lot of time knocking on doors and dropping off samples, and trying to make the very limited products that we have as available as I could to chefs. We come with a little bit of understanding of how those sort of restaurant kitchens work, and I was trying to make the system as easy and engageable for them as possible. But those are hard-earned dollars for us. And the other piece of that is they're not a huge part of our business. At this point, most independently owned restaurants in Manhattan garnish some of their plates with our product, and that's awesome. And I love it. And that's exactly when we talk about a local food economy. I mean, I'm talking about, we're paying somebody to cut the microgreens on our farm. I'm selling them to an independent restaurant who's then selling them to a local consumer, and all that. Like that's the circle that we are really actively trying to build, but there's not a lot of money in that. But the visibility of those relationships pays dividends for us. People come to us at the market all the time and say, we didn't know you were here. We saw you on the tall grass menu, or,
right.
But most where those sort of relationships with restaurants can really thrive, it's when restaurants have fully seasonal menus, so they can adjust with what's on their menu based on what we're producing. But majority of the restaurant culture in Manhattan doesn't function that way. I mean, they have fairly stagnant restaurant menus. Stagnant isn't the right word. It's something
stable.
That's right.
Consistent menus.
Consistent. There you go.
And some of them will plug and play. Like when we have cherry tomatoes available, they will stop buying them from a distributor and then buy them from us because they know they taste better. But it's not the kind of thing where there's no cherry tomatoes on the menu till they're available locally, right. Kind of thing. And so, I'm hugely thankful for all those relationships. I mean, it took us forever to get into Harry's, but once we did, that was awesome. And once we were in with Harry's, we're into the One Egg group, and all of a sudden we're now at Tallgrass and we're at Bourbon and Baker, and that they have worked with us, and they even sometimes do seasonal dishes now where they'll put okra on when we have it, and that sort of thing is, I think those are symbolically really important. Visibility-wise, they're really important. If you start to talk about, value per hour of what I do, is this making enough money?
It's a lot of labor. I can see that for the deliveries and
sure. Yeah. So
you mentioned early on that one of the attractions to Manhattan was not just Manhattan, but proximity to the larger market in Kansas City.
Sure.
So are you reaching out to, say, their farmers market?
Not as far as Kansas City yet.
Yeah.
But we have started going to Topeka this year.
Yep.
So we have, to some extent, exceeded what the current Manhattan market can absorb of the types of products that we are producing. So we're producing more than we can sell at the farmers market in Manhattan to restaurants and, with our online platform or through our CSA. So we've started this year going to Topeka, which is, with the labor and staffing that we have now, not quite so far as Kansas City. So it's a little more approachable or accessible, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you're pretty vegetable
oriented.
Any interest in fruits to go with the vegetables?
Yes.
That's another of the category of things that we, had in mind when we first moved here, but have not been able to have success with the space and infrastructure that we need for it.
I mean, we do raise. We have strawberries as part of our crop rotation in our garden, and that is certainly part of the fruits. And we have a poorly managed bramble patch as well. I think one of the downsides of the version of agriculture that we are getting into is that it's often very hard to see the forest from the trees in terms of the amount of hours in the day, and thinking about, if we diversified into orchard production, or if we, it's hard. And it's the same way as the managing the dairy goat herd and thinking about advancing that concept and what we want to do there. The hours,
it's a full-time job just to get it started.
Well, I sometimes try, because everyone is busy, and but I can't even, begin to quantify it. We farm at night. It's a full-time thing, and beyond that, and so
our main diversification outside of the vegetables has been into poultry. So we do eggs and meat poultry, both broiler chickens and turkeys, and then into a small set of prepared foods and baked goods that we sell at the market. So that's part of the value-added diversification that we've been able to tackle.
And we do manage a dairy goat herd as well still. So, we milk dairy goats for on-farm sales of raw goat milk, but also for using that milk to turn into cheese that we can use in our prepared food offerings. In terms of thinking about sort of the regional expansion of our farm, that original concept would be working very well if we were selling fancy goat cheeses, right? So the idea would be that if I was to be able to drive to the Kansas City restaurant community and deliver $1 to $2 grand worth of cheese a week, I could certainly justify that trip. But to reach that threshold with vegetables sort of exceeds the capacity of the amount of vegetables that we could grow. Our expansion into Topeka is, we're going every other week, but, and it's easy to sort of minimize it, but it's a fairly big deal for us. It's a big deal not only in the sense that we're sort of saying we can produce more food than we can sell in Riley County, and we should look beyond that. But it's also a big deal because from a cultural perspective of our farm, where Allison and I really like being at the farmers market in Manhattan every Saturday, and as a unit, engaging with our consumers that we value and having these really important face-to-face conversations, we're saying, okay, in order for our business to continue to be viable, we need to, I'm still there every other week, but
right, you're not going to be there every week for them. It's going to change that dynamic and change that relationship.
I know I have known vegetable farms along the way that have, when they decided to split up suddenly on Saturdays, that was the beginning of the end for them in some ways, because they're not celebrating the harvest together any longer, and it's a strain. But we built to having the capacity for a larger production of vegetables in 2020 and 2021, and we now are producing more vegetables than we can sell. And that's part of the reason that we scaled back our CSA quite a bit. Our CSA had originally been closer to 40 members, but just to make more vegetables available week to week, and change our production as well to be a little more geared towards market production as opposed to CSA production, because when you think about a CSA, you have to think about they can't get radishes every week for 10 weeks.
I thought that was exactly the advantage of a CSA for small farmers, is that they could get radishes every week.
But they just don't return the next year after you do that. And you had asked earlier about crop selection. The other piece that a major component of our crop selection is we have to think about having a full booth for 33 weeks of the year. Mm-hmm. So we have to think about days to maturity and harvest window of each crop, and when they would drop and when they would hit, and how that would all fit into keeping a booth full so that we can keep our staff paid, because it's not like I can say, well, mid-July, like, we're still a few weeks out from tomatoes and there's not a dang spring crop left, like, sorry, Charlie. So, that we have to crop in a way so that we can, from spinach and radishes in early April to, winter radishes and fennel and kale in December. We have to be able to think about that crop selection so that we have something to sell, I guess.
So you mentioned earlier interacting with Ray Cloyd, the extension,
yes. Yeah.
And it's a university town.
Yeah, sure.
Are there internship opportunities for students to come and learn how to do what you do?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and we gear our staffing to the horticulture department. Absolutely. Yeah. And we, currently, we generally, in season have 3 full-time people, and I guess 2 of them. Mm-hmm. 2 of them are hort students now, and it's been a great sort of self-fulfilling employment because, as horticulture students have to do an internship in their senior year, and I guess 4 or 5 years ago, the first one did that.
He gave a presentation to the younger horticulture students.
He gave a presentation to the younger hort students, and it has just continued along that way. And we are lucky enough to have faculty that are customers of ours as well. Dr. Kathy Lavis has always advocated for us with her students, and we have great customers that are faculty members as well, that just when they see students that might show interest in what we're doing, they push them our way. But in our version of farming, there are a lot of farmers that say you should be hiring employees who have agricultural skill. So if you looked at some of the other vegetable farms in and around Riley, I mean, a lot of them work with seasonal immigration visas to bring in, men from Mexico who are very good at growing vegetables and can grow them really well. But we, at the sacrifice of some efficiency, have gone the route of employing, kids who have never picked a tomato before. I mean, they may be horticulture students, but you'd be amazed, most of them have never picked up a rake. So,
well, as a faculty member here, thank you for that.
Well, yeah, and I like that sort of sounds like I'm doing a service. I don't see it that way, honestly, at this point. I mean, if we can have kids out there who want to learn about it, because the work is not. The work is very fulfilling, but it's not. You don't make a lot of money doing it, and the demands are huge, and so you have to derive satisfaction and educational knowledge and see the value in the work over and above the, frankly, pretty small amount of money that we can pay. But that has just continued. I mean, I am frequently very happy that we have these horticulture students out there. It's a joy to have kids that are interested, and it makes, I think, for us it's more fulfilling too, right? I mean, to feel like we're training kids. I don't know if they're all going to be farmers someday, but maybe they're learning to grow their own food.
Yeah, and we are spreading the word of sustainable seasonal eating, and that's a good thing to foster.
It's this education you were talking about, but just not with your clients, but
right. Yeah.
I wonder about expanding that local food system. Mm-hmm. You've talked about the challenges of expanding your own business. What will it take from your perspective to expand the local food system in Riley County? More crazy people like you?
Yeah. That would certainly help, yeah. A greater population that wants to, do the hard work of eating seasonally is a big piece of it.
It's, I think we go, maybe we ebb and flow a little in our enthusiasm for like spreading that word, but it's a hard thing to help people gain curiosity and be adventurous enough to think a little bit differently about how they approach their diet overall, making the habitual changes that they would need to not have the ease of whatever food they desire at their fingertips at any moment.
I would think, though, to go back to your comment, it's not just the students. You are actually educating the whole community with the people you interact with. And certainly here at K-State, the Global Food Systems program, we talk about these things periodically, that with an ever-increasing urbanization challenge, people are losing their connection to the food systems. And,
sure.
If you compare the typical, U.S. attitude towards food versus in some other parts of the world, we eat, in France or Italy, they celebrate food.
Sure.
You have a meal, you're going to sit down for 3 hours with the same folks and enjoy that meal.
Yeah.
In the United States, we eat because we have to.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think the other caveat I would add to what you're saying there is in France and Italy, the proportion of their income they spend on food is hugely higher than they do in the United States. And so, it's easy for me to say, well, the way to expand the local food system is to convince people to spend more money on food. But, I don't know. It's not that simple. For us, showing up every week is the best thing that we think we can do, and advocating for the kind of farm that we are and other farms that are doing something similar for us, trying to make their product accessible on our website, and helping other farms when we can with whether it be skill or equipment or visibility, advocating for all of those things. Those are big pieces for us in terms of making our food accessible to lower income pieces of our community. We work a lot more closely with food banks than we have ever done previously to this in the last couple of years in particular. And I think you guys interviewed Vicki James, and she's been a huge proponent to piece of that. And
is there a professional organization for people who are trying to do what you're doing that you interact with to you kind of share experience?
Yeah, there is a Specialty Crop Growers Association in Kansas that's quite active, and that's a good group and resource.
And they advocate through NRCS to try to help those federal organizations understand how they can best assist farms of our size. And the story of farmers in this country is predominantly a pretty drastic decline as we move generation to generation. But if you zero in on some of those numbers, the type of farm that we are is the only growing piece of agriculture. I think certainly in the 10 years that we've been doing this, if I think back to farmers markets that I worked at in the 90s, there's very little federal advocacy or certainly even at a state level advocacy for our sorts of farms. And that has just changed as farmers markets have become bigger revenue generators at a national level. I think the other big piece of growing the food system, at least in Riley County, that I see is figuring out how to have a farmers market that has a permanent structure, figuring out how to have a farmers market that has more money invested in it, gets more grant money so that it can do chef demos, or it can hire a market manager that runs a better market, and it can if the market is bigger, it can support more farmers, that sort of thing. And that's something that we run head on into pretty frequently with the Manhattan Farmers Market in particular. And I'm seeing it in Topeka too, is that there's a farmers market culture in Kansas that is maybe a little bit more flea market oriented, where there's a lot of craft vendors and there's a lot of resale of product that they either didn't make or produce or grow. And the niche of the producer-only farmers market is not a really viable piece of the farmers market culture in Kansas.
I've been to a number of them in D.C. and they're phenomenal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, those are the markets that I grew up. I worked for those farms, and those. It's an incredible. There's so many more people that have so much more available income that are willing to come and suspend and spend it at a farmer's market. And that's a huge piece of it. Mm-hmm. But if you, because my aunt started this organization, they look at a trajectory over 30 years of the amount of small market garden farms in the broader DC area, and that's everywhere from southern Pennsylvania to central Virginia, that are people that are driving 2 to 3 hours for the farmers market. And the growth is like you say, it's phenomenal. I mean, because there was a nonprofit organization built, put a system in place for these people to meet, right? It
is really interesting. We celebrate farmers in our discourse so much, and yet we don't have this cultural expectation of producer or sort of producer-only markets.
Yeah, I have this fascinating. So, I write a weekly email for our farm.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and I started it in the pandemic, and a lot of it started as we missed our interactions with our customers. Right. Mm-hmm. So it was a way for us to communicate our successes and our struggles, as well as the nuts and bolts of our farm-to-porch home delivery service, as we were sort of trying to figure out how to manage e-commerce, as our venue to communicate with people. But it has evolved since then into a weekly communication that people really value, and it's an opportunity for us to tell the story of our farm. And I don't indulge in a lot of the cliches of farming in these emails. I think the story I want to tell is where we are succeeding and where we are failing, and I want people to understand farming is hard, and showing up at the farmers market is hard, and these are things that we're all doing with intent, so it's an opportunity for us to communicate that. But so I'm telling all that story because I've been thinking about what I'm going to write tonight, because we sent it out on Monday night, and I had an interaction in Topeka on Saturday morning, where the Topeka Farmers Market, there's a lot of vegetable farms there that, I think in season they grow a lot of sweet corn, tomatoes, and watermelon. But at this time of year, if you were to walk up to their booth, they probably have rhubarb and asparagus that comes from their land. But most everything else that they're selling on their booth is purchased from a distributor, and they're just engaged in resale. Mm-hmm. And there are a few producer-only people at the farmers market, but a lot of them are older farmers who don't, they don't have a sign, they don't have a brand. They are probably all, I don't know them, but they grow beautiful. I'm looking at beautiful displays of, it's conventionally grown, but beautiful vegetables. And I had a customer come up to our booth, and she's eyeing me warily because I'm wearing a shirt that has our farm name on it, and we package our produce in produce boxes. And she's doubting whether or not we grew the thing we're selling, because our farm,
it looks too good.
Well, I don't want to say that, but it looks like it's a larger scale of production, so that there's no way that it was locally grown if it was at a larger scale of production. And that was just a really fat, she didn't, and I tried to give my little farmers, but she just didn't believe it. And she walked away. And it's a funny I don't think it's funny. It's interesting that the conversation starts from a perspective there where I'm proving to her
Right.
that
The assumption is not.
that I grew it, and that's and so that's
That says a lot.
That says a lot. Yeah. And
It's a conversation we have here in Manhattan too.
yeah, I mean, after 10
basis.
years, we have a great demographic of people that know what we do and value what we do. But there's new faculty that move to this town all the time, and you could come to our market booth in April or May, and we have a pretty impressive amount of vegetables there because this is a great time to be growing vegetables as long as you're willing to deal with frost management, which most farms are not. I mean, it's a lot more work for the dollar of the vegetable. I mean, but we use a lot of blankets and a lot of hoops. And there's people that can't possibly imagine that we grew all the things that are there
I've been there. Where did this lettuce come from? You didn't grow this lettuce. No, that's not possible.
Right,
Yeah. It is possible.
Yeah.
I was at a Department of Ag meeting a few years ago, and there was a gentleman there that he managed a plant in Topeka that packaged vegetables. So I mean, the can, frozen and things like that. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned that he had to import most of it from North Carolina and other places, and was kind of bemoaning that why won't Kansas grow the vegetables to support this industry? Mm-hmm. Do you think that opportunity exists at scale to support a company like that?
Well, I just think that the story of agriculture on that scale is that it is easier to grow a commodity crop. It's just less work. It takes less manpower. The seeds are a lot less expensive, and you can qualify for subsidies and crop insurance, and fit yourself into a food system that grows a lot of cow feed and make a living, and it's not nearly as hard.
Yeah.
I think there's another piece of it, particularly in Kansas in particular, that evolves around climate change and how hard it is to grow certain crops here now as water becomes less available, and not the water becomes less available, maybe that the rain cycles have changed so dramatically. Right. But I think it's just a reflection of an agricultural industrial food system that supports and encourages a particular type of farming that makes the other part harder. In places like the Salinas River Valley or in western North Carolina, there's an infrastructure in place in terms of agricultural workers, water availability, the supply chain networks. I mean, so it's, I guess another way to say about it is talk about supply chain networks. So if you wanted to be, pick it, whatever, a carrot farmer in central Kansas, you'd be the only one. Yeah. You're not on a trucking route because there's no other, the trucker doesn't want to come pick up carrots in central Kansas because there's nobody else to pick up carrots from, So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a certain extent. But, a great sort of example is there's a gentleman named Darrell Parks who raises hogs in Zendale, and he's a pastured pork production. So, I mean, his pigs are raised predominantly outside, and he farms organically. And so he raises his own food crops to feed his organically certified hogs. And he was able to become one of he has been, he's been farming for a long time, but he's part of the Organic Valley, which is a large cooperative of dairy and pork producers. It's predominantly focused in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa-ish, but he's the end of the line for their cooperative in terms of how far they'll drive, because he's the last one. And
as far south as they go.
Right. Yep. And if he stopped producing hogs, OV wouldn't drive a truck down this far. So I think that there is a part of it that has to do with supply chain networks as well.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I have one more question before we end this. We've been talking around it the whole time, but this will provide an opportunity for you to just hammer it home. There's a quotation from Wendell Berry on your website. Mm-hmm. Eating is an agricultural act. Mm-hmm. Why did you put that on your website, and what does it mean?
Well, I think it speaks to what we have talked about with making your choices about how you engage in the food system with intention. Every time you make a choice about what you cook for your meals, where you purchase your food, that is a choice that you make on how you support the agricultural system in your community. And so, I think that it's just a way to think about how your choices in eating, whether you're celebrating food as part of your daily life, or whether it's something that you just have to do to sustain yourself. Mm-hmm. I think it speaks to our commitment to eating with intent and to supporting a local and hopefully more sustainable agricultural system with intent.
Yep.
This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was great.
Fun.
Great to be here.
Thanks for coming to Manhattan. You make it a place I want to live. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that.
If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at ksu.edu/research/global food and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Gowen's album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University.